give people an idea of what I was talking about. In terms of looking at the polls, Connor, let's do a little crash course real quick for our viewers, because I think the way I've seen polls analyzed makes me think that most people don't know how to look at them. So let's take a look at Wisconsin real quick, because this is what I was talking about with the radiation effect that the Walls pick might have had. Is okay, so right now it's Harris plus 3.5 is the average. I don't care about the average. When I go, oh, let me show you. So it's plus 3.5 there for the average, right? I don't care about the average. I want to know the most recent poll. These things are changing by the day at this point. We are inside of the 1/4 mark left in the season. And that's why when I see the Bullfinch group, registered voters 500 sample size, I'm like, okay, Harris plus 9, that looks really great, but it's only a sample size of 500. And I haven't really heard of the Bullfinch group. But then I scroll down, I see the New York Times at 661 and Harris plus 6. I'm starting to think Wisconsin is bye-bye to the GOP this season.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past the GOP to try and push in the opposite direction, but I would definitely agree. I said this in my video when I initially responded to Kamala Harris's entry into the race. Realistically, she only needs Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, and at
Right.
that point, she's won. I think the Midwest is still very much key to her victory if she's going to win against Trump, and I think I don't want to curse us or jinx us at any point here. But it definitely looks like, at least in the case of Wisconsin, the momentum has definitely shifted. The other thing I think people need to remember about polls, and you've said it exactly right, Dieter, and that is polls are a measure of a specific point in time. Without accurate tracking of the long-term standards of a poll or a campaign, you're not really getting a larger depiction of what's going on. So if you see the 538 polling average showing, Kamala Harris leading by 3.5%, that's great and all, but that's usually based off the weighting of the multiple polls that they have on hand. And like you said, they need more recent polling, they need more large scale polling. And let's be real, that is very, very rarely what's going on the news. It's this poll says she's up 3.5%. This one says 2.2%. It doesn't give you a full depiction of what's going on unless you look at long-term tracking polls,
But
and
I
those are
always
few and far
say
between.
go most recent, always look at the sample size, and always look at RV versus LV, registered voters versus likely voters. In this election, actually, that disparity won't matter as much because I think we're going to see incredible turnout, just like we did in 2020. By the way, 2020 was the best turnout we've had in like 100 years or something. Did you know
Yep,
that,
that's
Connor?
correct.
Yeah, it was like
Yes, yeah, that was
66.
actually one of the weirdest
Big time. Big
things because
time.
I always complained about like polling averages and like things like that, like saying, "Hey, we get very low voter turnout. We get very low voter turnout here," and then the first presidential election I'm able to vote in, and it becomes a historic level of participation. So I was like, well, I can't say that as much.
Okay, so Michigan, 3.5. We just did Wisconsin, right? So this is
Yes.
Michigan, 3.5 point average. Bullfinch Group, same poll. New York Times, same poll. Now, you also got to look at, is it 3-way or 5-way or 2-way in terms of the polling? Not all these polls are equal, right? So Harris from the Bullfinch Group, it's 3 days young, or oh, sorry, it's 3 days later than the New York Times poll. So just take Harris is plus 6, and Kennedy's at 7%. So that's nice. That makes me feel good about Michigan. I think it's high noon is Pennsylvania. I think Trump's down to Pennsylvania or bust, but we'll talk about that in a second. New York Times, Harris plus 5. This was a little weird. Harris was plus 5 in a 5-way, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. No, it's actually a 6-way, and then she was plus 1 in the same pool with registered voters. So that was a registered voters versus likely voters disparity, and it was New York Times, which makes me a little bit fishy about those numbers. But it was interesting how Wisconsin is actually a wider margin for Harris and Walls right now than is Michigan. So that's Michigan. And then for the big dog, Pennsylvania, 2.1% average. Who cares? Let's get down to the Bullfinch in the New York Times. Five way, Harris is +4, according to the Bullfinch group. That ended on the 11th, which was only 3 days ago. And then you've got the New York Times, which was 5 days ago, Harris +2. I mean, she has all the momentum. Here's where I think this race could change. Number one, less likely, because I think the party and the city is ahead of it. But at the DNC convention next week, if things get nasty and we have Chicago 68 repeat in Chicago 24, maybe that causes some drama that leads to some unforeseeable places politically. I think even if it does get messy, it's not going to really matter long term. Everyone's showing up to beat the bully of Donald Trump. Also, not likely, but maybe more likely than that, is Kamala Harris somehow choking on the debate stage and Trump coming up with one of the all time upsets in American presidential debate history. And then that has a huge seismic shift in the momentum. But again, not likely. I don't think there is anything that one could predict that would happen, will happen to change this race. I think only something that no one could see coming can change this race.
Well, I'd knock on wood there just to make sure that Trump
Right.
doesn't actually manage to pull something out of a hat or something. But I will just say, generally speaking, debates, with the exclusion of the Joe Biden versus Donald Trump debate in this last election, it really they really don't change polling all that much. But in unless you've got something extreme like Joe Biden choking in that debate versus Trump, the real thing is that most people who are have any political opinion and are going to be voting accordingly have already kind of made up their mind. One of the things that has been relatively consistent here is that if you lean for Trump, probably going to vote for Trump. There's not much that's going to change your mind. One of the things that is consistent also is if you lean towards Biden, you're probably voting for Harris. Period. The issue is finding the people who were hesitant to even vote at all because they felt like their concerns about the candidate weren't being addressed, or issues such as Israel Palestine weren't being addressed. And now that there's a new candidate that at least seems, more inclined to hear those issues and not just rely on the incumbency advantage, I think that's what's pushing Harris towards winning in November. Granted, it's 2.5 months out, but for somebody like Donald Trump, who, for all intents and purposes, should be doing a lot better, especially because he's had so much time to craft a message, this is not something that you just recover from immediately. It's going to take time for him to even come close to a recovery, which means all the more time for Harris and Walz to really put him back in his place.
Okay. The other three states that we're waiting on polls for, and I'm not going to show you the numbers there because it can get a little confusing. Arizona, Nevada, Georgia. We haven't gotten a poll from any of those states for 11 days, and the ones that did come out were kind of weaker polls, and they all showed Trump actually within the margin of error anyway. So those are the polls that I'm really excited to take a look at, because let's go over to the map and talk about your prediction for the Electoral College versus mine, and we'll get Stat Pat to weigh in here if his computer holds up on us.
Yeah,
Poor guy.
technology is always fun to deal with.
Poor guy.
So
I mean, yeah.
right now I have on my end, just trying to pull up my stuff right here. I have the Democrats holding Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. I think with just how the momentum has shifted and how those states have even been, like, at the very least, lean Democratic. In that, I would say those three states are basically the ball game. So long as Harris holds on to these three, she's good.
Right.
Uh, Arizona, I'm more inclined to say, is going to shift towards Harris than I am with Georgia, because the Cook Political Report that I sent in the chat, they have Georgia tied both in the three-way race and the head-to-head race. So Georgia, I would say I'd be maybe a little more pessimistic and give that to Trump. But in the cases of Arizona, I would give that to Harris just as a lean. So I have it at right now 281 for the Democratic Party, and 257 for the Republicans. So North Carolina and Nevada to Trump, and then
Okay,
Georgia
so
as
you
well.
have Carolina. You have Carolina to Trump,
Yep.
and then you have. What am I doing? These ads are really annoying. You have Georgia going where?
I have Georgia going to Trump just out of pessimism, and Arizona to Biden, and then Nevada to Trump. But I would be clear here, that's just based off of my own, skepticism in myself. Just because I do not want to, knock on wood here and assume momentum is going to continue when I don't have reason to believe that that will be the case. Um, it is also possible that, if she flubs the debate, that in Pennsylvania could shift. But right now, with the momentum, like I said earlier, I don't think the debate's going to change all that much.